The Egyptian civilization sprang up out of seemingly nowhere to be the greatest civilization of its time and one of the most phenomenal civilizations that ever has existed, if not the most intriguing civilization to date on this planet. But from whence did this civilization spring? This has long been a question, and we have a little bit of evidence from antiquity that is causing some questions to be asked and people to wonder if things are not just as they have seemed to us. And actually, at the end of this, the talking points that I have are more question based because I think that this rock art does bring forward some intrigue, some mystery, and some answers in the form of questions. So this video will be in the archaeology playlist here on the channel, archaeology news playlist here on the channel, where I try to keep up to date with some of the new stuff on archaeology. So if you like this sort of thing, hitting the like button really does help me out. And if you want more archaeology stories in the future, consider hitting the subscribe button to stick around for more. In an article titled Rock Art Hints at the Origins of Egyptian Kings from phys.org, originally by Antiquity, we get this. So this is the picture of the rock art in question. See that there? You have the boat, you have oars, you have an oarman, and right in here you have someone who is supposedly something like a king. There is a clearer illustration of this later, so do not fret. We will see more. The article starts: a rock art panel near Aswan, Egypt, may depict a rare example of an elite individual from the first dynasty, shedding light on the formation of the ancient Egyptian state. The formation of the Egyptian state. The late 4th millennium BC was a key period in Egyptian history, which saw the beginning of political unification across Egypt, ultimately leading to the formation of the Egyptian state by the first pharaoh, Narmer, in about 3100 BC. However, little is known about how this pivotal process in prehistory took place. State formation in ancient Egypt and the processes that led to it are still difficult to conceptualize, states author of the research Dr. Dorian Van Hull from the Musée du Marateau. I don't speak Japanese. So, the rock art of the lower Nile Valley has the potential to help identify and analyze the earliest forms of political power in the region. And I think that this statement is in itself an oxymoron. Earliest forms of political power. Political power suggests that this was not an early form civilization, in my opinion. We'll get to that later. And how the landscape was exploited to express and consolidate authority. However, the number of relevant examples is limited. Therefore, a petroglyph panel showing what might be an early example of an Egyptian political elite individual is a fortunate occurrence. The engraving is well preserved and seems to portray an ornate boat being dragged by 5 figures. A standing figure propels the boat with an oar, while another figure remains seated on a structure that is interpreted as a palanquin. This is the illustration, a little bit clearer, of the incident itself. Now, it would seem that here is the boat, here is the oarman. Somewhere in here is what is interpreted as a political elite, and I'm guessing these are the 5 individuals that are dragging the boat, which would suggest, at least as far as I can tell, that this boat is docking, right? You're not dragging a boat with an oarman over the land. You are not in the sea or in the water being dragged by 5 individuals with a rope around the boat, right? So this is either pushing off or docking, and I imagine that this would be docking. It's hard to push off with a rope. Boats are among the most frequently recurring motifs in Egyptian iconography. We're going to highlight that for future use. Says Dr. Van Hull, during the pre-dynastic and proto-dynastic periods of 4500 to 3085 BC, the periods which foreshadowed pharaonic Egypt, the boat is ubiquitous and invested with complex ideological and symbolic meanings, not just symbolic meanings. We're going to talk about that later as well. To determine when this panel dates to, Dr. Van Hull compared the petroglyph to other examples of boats depicted in pre-pharaonic art and craftsmanship. His findings are published in the journal Antiquity. Through this comparison, he was able to suggest that the rock art was made during the transition from proto-dynastic to early dynastic periods. This was the time during which the Egyptian state was first formed, centuries before the first pyramids. Importantly, so you're talking about 4,000 years BC, which is 6,000 years ago, and still hundreds of years before the pyramids themselves. To suggest that a civilization in its infancy, which would be centuries, at least at this point in time on the earth, right, to go from nothing to the pyramids would be a pretty large feat. Importantly, it appears that the panel bears strong stylistic and iconographic affinities with the official imagery produced at the end of the proto-dynastic period, up to the reign of Narmer. For example, the seated figure has an elongated chin, which may represent the false beards worn by Egyptian kings since the first dynasty. This suggests that the seated figure was a member of the ruling class at the dawn of the first dynasty, which suggests that there was ruling class to be had before the first dynasty. How long does that sort of thing take to organize in a civilization? Furthermore, the high quality of the image suggests it was commissioned by an early political authority in Egypt, signaling that the rock art was a key method by which early Egyptian elites communicated their power. This has significant implications for our understanding and of the origins of the Egyptian state. The rock panel is an important addition to the existing corpus of engravings that can help us to better understand the role of rock art in the crucial events that led to the formation of the Egyptian state. Dr. Van Hol explains rock compositions became a tool for the authorities to communicate, mark the landscape, and assert their power. This seems sort of maybe counter to what we see today, where it is not the president of the United States who goes around and spray paints buildings, but people who normally don't have jobs. And this is, think of the tools that would have been required to do this. This is not an accident, obviously. This is not a, hey, it's Wednesday, might as well go make some rock art. There was power and time and wealth and technology behind what this was. It also indicates the importance of recording the rock art as quickly as possible. The landscape of the valley and its desert margins is currently being irreparably altered by, among other threats, mining and quarrying activities. Concludes Dr. Van Hull, the urgency of conducting rescue missions, such as the one that led to the discovery of the discussed panel, cannot be underestimated. Now, this line up here that we talked about earlier, that we highlighted about boats are among the most frequently recurring motifs in Egyptian iconography, suggests a couple things in and of itself, does it not? From wherever these people came, right? So we're talking about the early onset Egyptian civilization. This is not the game civilization. There was not a first turn whereby a settler had spawned. There had to be people before this. I think that there is growing evidence that Egypt may be more ancient than we thought, but the Egypt that we have today is the Egypt that has not been reclaimed by the desertification of large swaths of Africa. So the climate in Africa used to be much different, used to be greener up north in Africa. And what are the odds that desert swallowed what was once a thriving civilization, the beginnings of Egypt? I think that that is probably what happened. But from wherever these people came, they had enough technology to be boat builders and have the knowledge to get somewhere, right? So is this early Egypt, or is this early in what we consider Egypt? If these people were already sophisticated enough to be building boats and building ornate boats and have ornate facial dressings that sort of mock a beard, this civilization must have been around for much longer than just a proto-dynastic period or a pre-dynastic period. There had to have been serious goings on in this area of the world prior to what we are considering pre-dynastic. The number two thing that it makes me sort of think about here is they had enough civilization to have the stratification for there to be multiple levels of employment in this one picture. So in this one picture, what we are told that we have are people dragging the boat, who are outranked by the oarman, because the oarman is allowed to be present with the person who outranks him, who is the elite. So there are three levels of society in this one depiction of rock art. It is difficult to have that much stratification of civilization when you don't have a civilization, when you are being referred to as an era which is pre-dynastic. And the third thing that is perhaps most interesting to me, this is a very important person on a boat. Why? This suggests that they had impetus to leave somewhere else. Think of it this way. Spain, for example. Spain ruled the world for a while. Spain was a colonial power. You didn't catch the king on a boat. Even by the time that Spain was setting up colonies around the world, it was very dangerous to be at sea. Hell, the early 1900s, it was dangerous to be at sea, and people died crossing from Europe to America. Very, very dangerous time to be in the water. Where were they going? Why were they needing to get there? Why did you have important people on the boat? You could have lost that important person, that elite, perhaps that king, at any moment. There's no sign that this is a warship, WARSHIP, not WORSHIP. There's no sign that this is a ship made for war. This is a ship made for traveling, made for getting to somewhere. There's no evidence that this is a ship used for trade. If there is an elite individual on this boat, he is there to get somewhere. Is this a depiction of those early elites arriving in what would become the Egyptian civilization from wherever that civilization had been before and was forced to move by climactic change? As far as I know or can tell, there's no real story about what this picture actually represents. But those are some of the things that this picture, just a random story that happens to have been the discovery of a picture, sheds new light on the most ancient of civilizations, what they were doing, how they started it, and raises more questions in the process. That's all I have for this video. If you like or appreciate what it is that I do here, hitting the like button really does help me out, as it tells YouTube to share this video. And if you find yourself here by chance but not design, consider hitting the subscribe button to stick around for more.